conversation regarding that insulin resistance, for instance, is driven by stress hormones, and that a keto diet is not a good combination for GLPs for weight loss. And those are related. Believe it or not, those things are actually related based on the hormonal implications or the hormonal response to insulin resistance, GLPs, and our diet and the type of diet we're following. So if I were to say to you, what could you do to put yourself in a state in which you increased your fat oxidation or lipolysis, so fat burning, by 50% and gluconeogenesis by 30%. Gluconeogenesis is the process of making more glucose when you haven't eaten enough, right? So your body has to make more, your liver has to make more glucose, and that goes through a process of gluconeogenesis, breaking down proteins to make glucose. And then, of course, fat oxidation is the breaking down of fat from your sub-Q fat and putting it into your bloodstream. So you have free fatty acids going through your bloodstream. So if you had elevated fat burning and elevated gluconeogenesis, what would cause that? What would allow you to be in that state? Would you think a low carb diet or a no carb diet would allow you to get in that state where you have higher fat burning and more gluconeogenesis, creating glucose to make up for the lack of glucose in your diet? You'd be right. Maybe those numbers aren't exactly as they would from a low carb diet. It would depend on the person, depend on the diet. But we're talking about a 50% increase in fat burning and a 30% increase in gluconeogenesis. Now, if you were following a low carb diet, zero carb diet, what would drive that fat burning? What would stimulate the fat burning and the gluconeogenesis? What would turn those on? It would be stress hormones. And that's the stress hormones I'm talking about. So stress hormones are cortisol, glucagon, and epinephrine or adrenaline, depending on what country you're in, what you call it. But cortisol, adrenaline, glucagon. Glucagon primarily hits the liver for spitting out more glucose and making more glucose. Cortisol works with that as well. And the cortisol helps drive the fat burning, and the adrenaline helps drive the fat burning. And so, yeah, a low carb diet would stimulate that. You know what else stimulates that same state? Being insulin resistant. So in other words, so when they look at non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right, I was just reading a study on patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is, of course, is fat gathering around the liver, not from alcoholism, but it's from insulin resistance, a very high state of insulin resistance. They found that these patients with NAFLD had 50% increase of fat burning and a 30% increase in gluconeogenesis. So what we have here is stress hormone induced fat burning and gluconeogenesis in people with severe insulin resistance. So type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, obesity that's driven by metabolic disease. And that's where the parallel comes in. It's like, well, we need to look a little closer. What else causes this state? What else causes this elevated state of stress that drives fat burning and gluconeogenesis? Taking corticosteroids. Okay. So you have an injury, they give you a steroid to help reduce the inflammation, or just even an injury and stress, like my post that Brad was talking about this morning. I put my interview with Brad Kearns. He said you have a stressful event, you're in the hospital, you're not hungry, your stress hormones are high you're not hungry because you're releasing fat and you're releasing gluconeogenesis through your stress hormones, right? And this is so stressful state, trauma, injury can cause the same thing. Being diabetic, have severe insulin resistance, and a low carb diet. So, and what GLPs do is GLPs try to reduce, they turn off the glucagon. They have a signaling in there to turn off the glucagon, so lower the stress hormones. So you're making less glucose. and they raise insulin. They make your body release more insulin, which then turns down the stress hormones. So that's where I said the gluconeogenesis or the GLPs fight your ketogenic diet the same way they're fighting your insulin resistance, because the ketogenic diet, the low carb diet, and the insulin resistant state are very parallel hormonally. And the GLP is trying to flip it, turn down the stress hormones and turn up the insulin. So, number of studies showing that insulin resistance is caused by a high level of fat oxidation in the mitochondria. So more fat burning leads to the insulin resistance. Well, how can that be? Well, because the mitochondria is got to metabolize both fats and sugars, right? And when there's an excessive amount of fat burning, that actually causes a backup in the glucose getting into the mitochondria for glucose oxidation. And then that backup causes basically it turns into lactate, which then causes the backup in glucose, and which raises insulin. But it starts with those stress hormones. So we have a study showing stress-induced fat burning leads to insulin resistance. The stress hormones induced fat oxidation releases more fat burning, more fat from the tissues, which goes to the mitochondria and then blocks the glucose from getting in. Another study looking at the relationship between high amounts of fat burning and insulin resistance showed that it doesn't matter how much glucose is available. It could be a low or a high amount of glucose. Really, it could be as much glucose as you want trying to come into the mitochondria. It's not going to make it if there's a lot of fat oxidation going on. Because the fat oxidation not only blocks it, but it creates a lot of reactive oxygen species or oxidative stress. Yeah, so fat oxidation creates more reactive oxygen species than glucose oxidation. Take whatever search criteria you want, search the studies, use ChatGPT or whatever AI you want, Google, ask which type of metabolism or oxidation causes more reactive oxygen species, ROS, fat oxidation, which we call beta oxidation if you're looking it up, or glucose oxidation. It will every time say fat oxidation. So it's the fat oxidation creating reactive oxygen species, which creates that oxidative stress that leads to, and that keeps the glucose out, that leads to elevated blood sugar and elevated insulin, essentially insulin resistance. This can also happen, that fat oxidation can also release the fat, right, into the bloodstream that ends up being collected or built up in the muscle. So when you have fat built up in the muscle, that also blocks glucose oxidation and creates insulin resistance. And so yet another study showed, doing tracer studies, where does the fat in fatty liver disease come from? Where's the fat gathering around the fatty liver disease? What are its sources? And they divide it by percentage. 60% of the fat gathered around the liver in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease comes from fat that's been broken down in lipolysis from other parts of the body and then is restored around the liver. So it's fat that was already stored, broken down by the stress hormones, the elevated cortisol and adrenaline, and then restored at the liver. Another 15% comes from dietary fat. So the dietary fat, the fat that's eaten, is collected at the liver. And they can tell the difference because the fat that's been stored is non-esterified fat, and the fat you've eaten is esterified. So they can tell the difference between the fat. So the 60% is coming from stored fat that's been recently released by the stress hormones, restored at the liver. 15% is coming from dietary fat. The last 25% comes from glucose, but with elevated gluconeogenesis. Remember, gluconeogenesis in NAFLD is elevated by 30%. You have an elevation of glucose, which some of that is going to be excess. We have remember the fatty acid oxidation is causing the backup of glucose and the insulin resistance. So then that backed up glucose is now, some of it's being converted to fat and stored in the liver. But everyone's accusing of fructose, right? Accusing fructose or accusing sugar of being the primary thing causing the fat at the liver. It's not. It's 75% that's coming from fat. 25% is coming from glucose. But remember, you have elevated gluconeogenesis. Everyone likes to blame fructose. I'm saying I'm eating most of my carbs from fruit. Oh, fructose causes fat in liver. Actually, no. When they do yet more tracer studies on how fructose is metabolized before it is ever metabolized in the liver, before it ever hits the mitochondria, 90% of the fructose you consume is turned into either glucose, glycogen, or lactate. Only 10% of it is actually metabolized as fructose. Eat all the fructose you want. All the fruit you can eat, even the juice, the honey. At any point, your blood sugar is what? If it's normal, it's going to be somewhere between 70 and 90 milligrams per deciliter. You'd be lucky if you ate all the fruit and juice you could possibly stand. You'd be lucky if 10% of that sugar, of that 80 milligrams per deciliter, if 8 milligrams was fructose. Eat all you want, you're not going to get more than 10% of your blood sugar as being fructose. And if you're just eating a normal diet where you just have a little fruit here and a little fruit there, it's far less than that. You're never going to overwhelm your blood sugar with fructose. It's impossible. So I had a couple questions come in. I'm not sure I can read them because they're flying by. Someone wants to be in my video, but I don't know you. So guess what? I don't need I know offense, but I don't need a free radical. I don't know. Type of fat matter. PUFAs create more ROS than saturated monosaturated. Yes, they do, because they are good one. Yeah, and I know you, Guy. So hey, Guy, what's up? Yes, when oxidized, the polyunsaturated fats are much more oxidative, for sure. And most people are eating very oxidative fats, polyunsaturated fats. But in general, what I'm talking about is in a comparison of fat oxidation to glucose oxidation. Fat oxidation puts out more reactive oxygen species. Another thing you may not realize is that glucose oxidation is actually more efficient than fat oxidation in terms of oxygen used. In other words, you're going to get more energy per molecule of oxygen with glucose oxidation than you will with fat oxidation. Now, people like to say, "Oh, fat oxidation is much more efficient because you get more energy per molecule." Yeah, there's more calories in a molecule of fat than there is in a molecule of glucose. So, yeah, that's like saying you're going to get more of a gallon than a half a gallon, because calorically it's twice as much. But when we're talking about making energy, most of us, especially people who are trying to lose weight, there's no shortage of calories. Calories are not what we're not worried about, not having enough calories. So the amount of calories available as far as efficiency is a little bit irrelevant. Oxygen is the rate limiter for most of us based on VO2 max, or as an example, for energy output or for performance. But when it comes to metabolism, which we use oxygen to burn these energies, right, and turn them into ATP in our mitochondria, the mitochondria uses oxygen. So the real rate limiter we're worried about for efficiency is actually oxygen. Again, do your Google search, do your chat search. Glucose oxidation is more efficient per oxygen molecule or oxygen atom than fat oxidation. So, and that's a little off, but what I'm trying to point out is we have a misconception around, and I had it for a long time, around glucose oxidation versus fat oxidation. But I think what's really missing is that, one, there's this misconception that people with high levels of insulin resistance, diabetes, obesity, NAFLD, aren't burning fat. We think for some reason, including doctors, that these insulin-resistant people aren't burning fat, when reality is they're burning fat at a higher level than the rest of us because of the elevated stress hormones. And those elevated, that's what's causing that large amount of fat going into the mitochondria is causing the backup of glucose insulin resistance, which leads to why I'm addressing this. And I don't want you to say I'm just picking on it for no reason, but I've been hearing since I started posting about this, and since I've actually learned this a while ago, and I'm seeing more and more people say, I'm having problems with keto and carnivore because my blood sugar is going up. My thyroid's tanking. I have no energy. I'm gaining, some of them even gaining weight. I had a nice long interview with Lisa Wiedemann, carnivore doctor, that came out Sunday on her YouTube. She's talking about, she put out a video just a few days before. She's been gaining weight. She was a carnivore for 16 years. She's had carbs in her blood sugar's coming down, and she's losing weight, adding carbs and reducing fat. And I'm hearing more and more people who are a little intimidated to speak up because they kind of see how people pounce, right? As people can see in my feed, people are pouncing, they're attacking, they're trying to quote other people, and though they don't have the concepts, they're dropping names. Have you listened to so-and-so? It's like, I don't care who it is. If it doesn't line up with experience and research, it's wrong. I don't care what letters he's got after his name or she's got after her name. We're seeing this over and over again. We see it in people posting their blood work who are on long-term carnivore keto with elevated blood sugar and elevated A1C. And that's the insulin resistance from what I'm talking about, the fat oxidation, the increased fat oxidation blocking the glucose from getting in, right? And those stress hormones causing insulin resistance, right? And there's a certain amount of insulin resistance because they don't have enough blood sugar on that diet. And their body, the muscles want to spare a little bit for the brain, so it has enough glucose, so the muscles won't take on as much glucose. And that does create some elevation of blood sugar. And then over time of doing this, the stress hormones come up to keep making up for the lack of glucose. And these people are reversing it by adding glucose. They are turning off the need for gluconeogenesis as much because they're supplying what their body's trying to make. And then the elevated insulin turns off the cortisol and the other stress hormones, just like the GLPs work. So going on a high carb, low fat diet is essentially doing what the GLPs are trying to do with people who are trying to lose weight hormonally, but you're doing it through your diet. And that's why those two work really well. If you're going to use a GLP, go with a high carb, low fat, get the fat out of the way, let insulin come up, turn off the glucagon, turn off the stress hormones, and you'll see glucose oxidation improve. Glucose will come down. As in, between meals during the day, glucose levels will come down, fasting glucose will come down, and over the course of several months, the A1C will come down as that exposure decreases. And I did it myself. I saw it in my own numbers. I saw my glucose come down from the mid-90s when I added carbs in down to 79, 80. My last two blood tests for the last 2 years, since I added these carbs in over the last little over 2 years ago, come down from 90s to right around 80 in the blood work. And there's mornings I wake up, I've been posting it, I'm in the 70s. And I'm not saying I added a little bit of carb. I hear the people say, I'm going to add a little carb, I'm going to go up to 100, 150. No. I went up to 250 to 300 2 years ago. 4 months ago, I went up to 400 grams of carbs a day. 350 to 400. My A1C came down to 5.3, and it had been creeping up a little bit. It had been creeping up with the low carb diet. My fasting glucose was in the 90s. Now it's consistently 70s and 80s. A1C at 5.3. Fasting insulin, those wondering, it's always been around 3. This last test after 4 months of 400 grams of carbs, it was 2.6. And my liver numbers, super quiet. My doctor looked at it and said, I've never seen your liver numbers this low. Your liver is the quietest I've ever seen it. And those of you who are pay attention to that, yes, my cholesterol did drop significantly. Actually, in a year, it dropped by 30%. My doc he said, I've never seen that happen without medication. And it was from, I'm still eating protein, I'm eating a lot less fat, and a lot more carbs. And I have a lot better glucose oxidation. So for those wondering, that's all the stir. That's what's going on. That's why people are getting out of the carnivore diet, because their numbers are going the wrong direction. And you really can't justify that away. You can make up all sorts of stuff, but if your fasting blood sugar is high, like over 90, over 100, 110, some of these people 120, 130, that's diabetic level. A1C at 5.9, 6.1, 6.2, that's diabetic level. When I eat my carbs, my 100, 150 grams of carbs for breakfast, it goes up. It might go to 120, 130, 140, which is where these guys are sitting first thing in the morning and sometimes all day above 110, 120. But then an hour after eating 100 grams of carbs, 150 grams of carbs, it's back down below 90. I had some guy on YouTube, you might be watching. He said, oh, it doesn't, the sustained glucose doesn't matter because that's from gluconeogenesis, as if because the glucose came from gluconeogenesis, it's free game. It doesn't do anything detrimental because it came from my liver, as opposed to if I ate it, well, it goes up and then comes down. That's what's dangerous. It's dangerous because it went up and came down. It's a spike. Let's think about this, guys. It went up over the course of an hour and came back down. So it went up and touched or went just slightly higher than when some of these guys have sitting all day long and then came down below 90. Who's having more exposure? Whose red blood cells are getting more exposure to sugar? I'll eat if I eat 4 or 5 meals a day, and every time it goes up for an hour, it comes back down, it's still less exposure to sugar than someone who's sustaining 110, 120 all day long, which is why, as shown by my A1C being 5.3 and their A1C being 6, 6.1, 6.2. That tracks, right? I have low blood sugar, low A1C. They have high blood sugar, high A1C. Yeah, that's the problem. Parallel to diabetics. Why is it different? Because you're eating more fat and that makes that okay? No, that's ridiculous. That's cognitive dissonance again. That's making up stories, trying to reach for things to explain away an obvious problem. So, yeah, you might get some immediate relief on a low carb diet if you have a really crappy diet. If you had the SAD diet, if you're eating a bunch of processed food, and that low carb diet helps you clean it up and get rid of the processed food, get you rid of, like what Guy mentioned earlier, the highly processed seed oils that are super oxidative, and that will bring it down some and get rid of some of the other crappy chemicals and cleans up your gut, or maybe clears up your autoimmune issue. Absolutely. That will improve it because you've just lowered, by going on a cleaner diet, you've just lowered your oxidative stress. What I'm saying is oxidative stress drives the insulin resistance. It's not sugar. It's whatever causes oxidative stress or more oxidative stress. So it's not sugar from apples, bananas, rice, potatoes. We've been eating those things, cultivating them, not just eating them, cultivating fruit, potatoes, bread, grains from bread for over 9 to 10,000 years, and eating without sign of metabolic disease. But suddenly in the 20th century, these foods are causing a disease rate that is higher than anything else, that is killing us faster than anything else, that's putting most of the people in the hospital who are in the hospital, they're for metabolic disease. We've gone from 1% to 42% obesity in 120 years. We've come from almost non-existent heart attacks to 1 in 4 dies of a heart attack in 120 years. By the way, did you realize we're eating less caloric sweetener? So sugar, high fructose corn syrup, whatever sweetener, right? Whatever we use for sweeteners, all the names for sweeteners, the FDA knows what those are. and it tracks them on the front end, not after the corporation renames them. So whether it's honey, maple syrup, whatever kind of organic brown sugar, high fructose corn syrup, we're eating compared to what we ate in 1970. We're back to 1970 levels. In 2000, our caloric sweetener consumption started dropping. And it's down to where we were in 1970 levels, yet obesity and diabetes have hockey stick straight up during this time. And I posted that chart in my stories earlier if you want to check it out. It's a chart from Dr. Chris Kenobi, to give him credit, because he's done the research on this. And our sugar consumption really hasn't changed much since 1920 or 30. We may have gone up maybe 10% since then. It's not the sugar, guys. It's the seed oils. It's the processed food. We've been eating sugar a long time. I'm talking about sugar, not just from fruit. I'm talking about sugar, like straight up processed sugar. We've been eating it a long time. When we were at almost just 10% lower than we are now in 1930, diabetes rate was 1/3 of 1%. As sugar dropped, obesity and diabetes went up. There's another study I published. It was a woman who at UC Irvine, it was Riverside mouse study, yeah, but she gave them fructose, and then fructose with coconut oil and fructose with soybean oil. So which one had the worst symptoms of metabolic disease with fatty liver and out of range glucose and lesions like, the heart disease and so forth, all the things that form from insulin resistance. So the ones with fructose only actually had the lowest rates of, or lowest fructose only and fructose with coconut oil had the lowest amount of disease, the least symptoms of disease, of metabolic disease. Next highest, soybean oil and fructose. The worst insulin resistance, the worst signs of fatty liver and lesions on the liver and fat were the ones getting soybean oil only. The fructose, her conclusion was, this is a PhD in genetics, and we're talking about an Ivy League PhD who's now a researcher at UC Riverside. The fructose was protective of the insulin resistance against the soybean oil. As soon as you remove the fructose, and they were all eating the same amount of calories, and all the calories that come from soybean oil without the fructose, that was the worst. The soybean oil is driving it. But these high-fat diets with very low carbs, while there's an initial cleanup, long-term, they're causing the problems. And they can cause insulin resistance. Again, we see this in research from multiple causes. It's oxidative stress. And where that oxidative stress comes from, processed food, or a steroid, or trauma, an injury, alcohol, or because you're metabolizing way too much fat and it's blocking the insulin and the insulin's getting backed up, or blocking the glucose is getting backed up, raising the insulin. It doesn't matter what causes it. That's the response. It comes back to oxidative stress from any and all causes. So I'm sure this is going to get more questions, which I love. I love the questions. I wish I just could read them more easily here. Keto. Yeah. So Guy, I see you're back here, buddy. Love to discuss. The studies are saying keto eating is causing stress hormones to be elevated long-term, not just during the adaptation period. Correct. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Because that's what's driving the fat burning, the breakdown of fat, and that's what's causing the gluconeogenesis. You can't keep making glucose through gluconeogenesis without stress hormones. The adaptation period is the elevation of the stress hormones. That's the adaptation period. For instance, It's the adaptation to the diet that causes the problem. When you become adapted to the keto or carnivore diet, that causes the problem, because that's when your stress hormones have cranked up enough to start supplying the high levels of fat oxidation and the high levels of gluconeogenesis, which is then raising the blood sugar up. So insulin isn't as necessary. That's why the fasting insulin stays low. I think Dr. Rob Sivas, calls it insulin suppression. And there may be some element of insulin suppression keeping their insulin levels low, but that's not the root cause of the problem. Root cause of the problem is the increased fat oxidation in the mitochondria, just like it is with any other form of insulin resistance. And I'll post these studies in the captions of the YouTube version. So I'm doing this on Instagram and YouTube same time. I'll try to put some of these studies in the caption. I'll link the PMID, right? The PubMed ID, or the link in the captions on Instagram. You won't be able to click them, obviously, or in the comments if I need to. They'll be under the caption in the YouTube video, so you can click on them and look at them yourself, because they're worth the read. I just, blows my mind when I start reading this stuff. But fat oxidation causes the insulin resistance, not the other. And people with insulin resistance are burning fat at a high level. They're breaking it down. Unfortunately, a lot of it's being restored in their visceral area, and that's why they get all the visceral fat. And we've known this. This is not uncommon. We talk about stress, cortisol. We have the stress hormones going, fight or flight. We can't run from the lions. We end up storing the energy in our gut, in our visceral, right? This was common knowledge 20 years ago, right? Stress behind a desk, fight or flight, nowhere for energy to go, breaks down muscle, stores it in the gut. It's the same thing, just initiated from a different stimulus. Same process. Stress hormones, increased fat oxidation, blocks the glucose oxidation, too much energy ends up getting stored in the visceral and causing insulin resistance. It's not about the sugar. So, say adaptation takes, it depends on the person. I mean, some people are feeling, I'm getting messages from people, they start feeling it in 3 months, some at 6 months, some it's years. The adaptation can happen. Okay, let me rephrase that. The adaptation where it feels more normal for you can happen within weeks or months. The adaptation to the point that starts causing insulin resistance and the low thyroid, that can vary depending on how often you cheat on your diet. That can vary on the person genetically. But it seems it's happening enough. There needs to be awareness. Just because it hasn't happened to you doesn't mean it won't happen ever, or two, that it's invalid. So to say because it hasn't happened to you that it doesn't make sense and it's not valid, you're denying the experience of all of these people who have been doing this diet for a very long time, who are nutrition coaches and medical doctors, are saying, this is what I'm experiencing from the carnivore diet or the keto diet. I'm adding carbs in and it's resolving these symptoms. You can't deny their experience, especially when the research backs it up and explains it very clearly. Are you concerned with the health outcome, or are you concerned with defending your diet? Because then you're in a religion, and in which case I have no more to discuss with you, because I'm not going to argue your religion, because we're no longer speaking logically or speaking in terms of facts. You're speaking in terms of your faith and your emotions. And then we have nothing more to discuss. Keep your religion, keep your faith and emotions, and that's around your diet. That's you. Good. Go for it. Whatever. I hope it works out. I hope you figure it out. But we no longer have anything to discuss because there's no more logic involved, right? If you can deny someone else's experience that pairs and is explained well by research and biochemistry, because it hasn't happened to you, or because you can't wrap your head around it, or because so-and-so told you something and they have more letters under their name or whatever, you're defending a religion. And when we start making the strategy more important than the health outcome, you got it wrong. You're going in the wrong direction. You have an unhealthy relationship with your diet. And you might need a diet divorce. It's time for that diet divorce because you're in an unhealthy relationship. It's an abusive relationship, and you're just going to go diet harder every time it doesn't work. And you know, and when you get tired of being abused or abusing yourself, come on back. We can have a conversation. I thought I had one more point. I tend to hit bunny trails and go a little long because I do love this and I obsess over it and I read, quite a bit. But this is not, I have no desire, just for clarity, I have no desire to attack people or to address people in my conversation. So please don't come at me addressing them, because I have nothing against the people who are talking about this diet or promoting this diet or coaching on this diet. I am addressing the ideology for the sake of helping the people who are suffering with it and don't have answers and don't understand it. And they're looking for answers and they need to fix it because they're having negative side effects. And I've already experienced them. I experienced them 3, 4, 5 years ago with low carb and intermittent fasting running me into the ground. Cortisol levels up, TSH going up, which means a stress thyroid, and run down, not sleeping well, blood sugar in the 90s, A1C is creeping up. More carbs I added, the better my blood sugar got. I started adding it and when I brought the fat down, whoo, that was magical. I got lean fast. I dropped weight fast. And then so did my wife. So did my daughter. And my wife and I aren't spring chickens either. We're in our 50s. So not that easy. Dropped weight within 8 weeks. Dropped 10 pounds. She dropped 10. I dropped 6. My wife dropped much. This happened to me as a carnivore. Yep. Adding some carbs back. Thank you, Cindy. Game changer. Yeah. So, and then people say, well, you're athletic, you're lean. That's great for you. I've asked about cholesterol because I was curious. There's a correlation between adaptation, insulin resistance, cholesterol. Yeah. So what I think the issue with cholesterol is not so much fat, or that fat is bad, or that saturated fat is bad. I think the cholesterol is a stress response. I think it's yet another side effect of the stress hormones and the stress response. So as I added carbs, my cholesterol came down. Total, LDL, the whole shebang came down. And it's dropped down like I've never seen it this low, because of high carb and my fat's like below, I keep it below 40 or 50 grams a day. Guess what? If my body needs more fat, it can either take it from body fat, which it did when I really cut it low, or it can make it from the carbs if it really needs it. But it's far less stressful for my body to make fat from carbs if it needs the fat than it is to make glucose from protein. Glucose from protein requires stress hormones, and it's a stress response, and it's a catabolic response. It's a catabolic process because you're breaking down tissue to do it. Your body thinks it's starving, and that's why it lowers thyroid, increases stress hormone, and eventually low thyroid ends up lowering your sex hormones long term. Whereas converting carbs to fat is kind of the natural way we're supposed to do it. That's the way it's supposed to happen. We're supposed to be making any excess fat we need comes from the carbohydrates. That's okay. Just like when you eat carbohydrates and your blood glucose goes up and the insulin comes down and pushes it into cells and it goes down again, that's normal. That's okay. That's what we're supposed to work. So someone's in me, how many eggs? How many eggs? I'm not going to get specific, but they have a lot of fat in them. So find your fat, whatever your fat goal is. Remember, eggs have about as much fat as they do protein. So count the fat. I used to eat 3 or 4 eggs a day for 20 years, guys. I was low carb for 20 years, recommended low carb for over 20 years, and intermittent fasting for 10 of it. I've done this. I've been through it. I wore it out. I inflicted it on other people. That's why it's my penance to take abuse for it. This is my penance. Okay. So count the fat, how much fat you want. If you want to burn fat, get rid of your fat. Stop eating it, and your body will use what you got on board. It's that simple. It makes that much sense. Carnivore kills your sleep. Yeah, absolutely, because of the stress hormones, right? And if you don't have enough glycogen stored in your liver, then when you run out of glycogen overnight, because you can go down to like 20% of liver capacity glycogen, down to 20, you use up 80% of your full liver glycogen in an 8-hour sleep. So if you're already low, when you get down to 20%, gluconeogenesis kicks in, which means the stress hormones go up to make that happen. Stress hormones go up, you wake up, you're staring at the ceiling, you're thinking about all the things you didn't do yesterday and you got to do today. And your body's trying to make glucose because you ran out of glycogen. A full tank of glycogen for that liver, great night's sleep. Much better than before. So I'll put them in, buddy. I'll put them in, guy. So people said, well, you're athletic. This thin people's great. You're already healthy. Yeah, it makes sense. You work out a lot, which I really don't compared to people who work out a lot. I really don't work out a lot, honestly. I've just been doing it since I was 17, and that's like, almost 40 years ago. I would say the same thing for someone who is diabetic, obese, fatty liver disease, high carb, low fat. Get the fat out of the way, improve the glucose oxidation. You will see the blood sugar come down. We have proof of this. My last point. You want to look up something interesting that'll kind of blow your mind. The Kempner Rice Diet, Kempner. I'll put that link in there. There's a few links. Kempner Rice Diet from 1940, in which he had a group of people who had very high blood pressure, high hypertension. In 1940, we didn't have blood pressure meds, which means they were going to die. So if you have high blood pressure without high blood pressure meds, with hypertension, you got maybe 6 months, at most a year to live. That hypertension will kill you. That's why it's called the silent killer. No one dies of it anymore all the time. We don't have as many people dying of it all the time because they have meds for it. But if it goes undetected, it'll kill you. So he took a group of them, put them on a diet of rice, fruit juice, and sometimes a little sugar if they were thin, and he was worried about them losing too much weight. So he gave them some extra calories. 2,000 to 2,400 calories. They're not on this low-calorie diet. It was reverse their hypertension. They had like 200 over 180 kind of hypertension. And he used the white rice diet, which was like 90% carb, maybe 5%, maybe 10% top protein from the rice, almost zero fat, right? 1% fat, just because it snuck in the kernel, right? Almost no fat, all carb from carb sources, rice, fruit juice, sometimes some sugar. Eat as much as you want, but it's usually 200 to 2,400 calories. And their hypertension reversed for like 2/3 of them. Across the board, it was very successful. Then they had an obese group of them, very obese, very, very obese people. Put them on the white rice diet, the rice and fruit. It was lower calorie, much lower calorie, 800 to 1,000 calories. Okay, so that says, well, yeah, putting anybody on that goes, wait. They reversed it. It's not sustainable. You know what? You know what's not sustainable? Obesity, diabetes, and fatty liver disease, hypertension, not sustainable. Hypertension guys really weren't sustainable. They were going to die from it. So if you gave me a choice between hypertension, diabetes, fatty liver, being obese, heart disease developing, or eat rice and fruit, I'll take the rice and fruit all day long. That's more sustainable to me than walking around with those diseases, to me. And if it reverses it, then you can go clean your diet up. Guess what? They go back. They don't yo-yo. And the people I know who have done the high carb, low fat diet, they lose the weight, they readjust things a little bit, balance out. They don't yo-yo. They go travel, they eat something, eat off plan, come back. They're not yo-yoing. They're not gaining the weight back. Weight falls off sometimes, even while they're gone, while they're traveling. So white rice diet. Then a group with diabetes. Back to the 2,000, 2,400 calorie diet, white rice, fruit juice. Reversed diabetes symptoms, lowered need for their insulin meds, and even reversed some diabetic retinopathy. And all the other symptoms that come with diabetes basically reversed them. So this diet performed it out of Duke University out there in Durham, right? Duke University. Okay. Not some shabby little university. Duke University. It ran for 74 years. to help people with weight loss, reversing insulin resistance from 1940 to 2003 in Duke, and then it moved its location off campus for the last 10 years to 2013. So it actually started in 1939. So 74 years. This diet ran, 64 of it out of Duke University, reversing disease on the white rice, fruit juice diet. Because if it wasn't effective, do you think they would have continued it for 75 years? No, of course not. And at Duke University, because they're getting money from the rice lobby. Is that what you got to tell me? Come on. Duke University wouldn't risk its reputation for a little money from the rice lobby. They've got plenty of money. They ran it because it worked. Now, am I saying go have the white rice diet? I'm not telling you to eat the white rice diet. What I'm saying is what it proves is that, one, whole food carbs, so that's what they're eating, rice and fruit, and even fruit juice, do not cause insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, obesity, hypertension. They don't cause it because they put them on it, and that's all they're eating, and it reverses those things. And that's my second point. High carb, low fat reverses insulin resistance. Get rid of the fat, glucose oxidation improves. Insulin resistance goes away. I know I taught and recommended low carb for over 20 years, flipped it on its head, but guess what? It works consistently. It works. So I think I'm done. I'm kind of hungry. I've been talking a lot longer than I intended. I hope this clears up for people. I really want clarity. I don't want to I know reels, it's short. You pop in, you just say it, you go because it's a reel and you want the reach, and stirs up some controversy. But I want people to understand this, and that's what this is for. So if you really want to understand it and you have sincere questions and you come to me with sincere, open-minded question or confusion, happy to discuss. You come at me with your religious, zealous, dropping names. What about this guy says, what that guy says, but you can't discuss the concept. You probably just need to listen for a while or seek therapy, one of the two. But yeah, thank you. Thank you. I love it. Hey, thanks for the feedback. Fernanda, thank you. Megan, thank you. Guy, appreciate the questions. Happy to keep answering. I know Guy, we met in Costa Rica at Saladino's retreat and always stayed in touch. Thank you. I'm not sure if I can say it's all running together. My eyes are tired, so I can't read it, but starts with an H. Thank you. Appreciate your question or your appreciation. Yeah, I will put those in because I want people to read these for themselves, right? I'm not trying to own it. Huevo Maximus. Yeah, that's the guy I was talking about. Huevos Maximus. Oh, that makes sense. Eggs Maximus. And you're asking about the eggs and cholesterol. We don't worry about your cholesterol from the eggs. It's a matter of measuring your fat. A full egg has 6 grams of fat, 7 grams of protein. If you're trying to keep fat low, like I would recommend people when they raise carbs, keep it well under 50 or even under 40 if you really want to aggressive, lose some fat. Then, you got to count the eggs. You got to count the fat in the eggs. It's not because they're bad for you. I'm not saying the fat is bad for you or the eggs are bad for you. I'm saying too much fat in your diet interferes with the metabolism. So here, people keep asking about macros. What I'm doing right now, which is working really well, is 60 to 65% carb, about 20 to sometimes 25% protein, and that leaves me about 15% usually in fat. Now you could go to 20 fat and do 20 protein, 60 carb and be great. So there's room for fluctuation there. I just like being a little bit on the leaner side, not that because of health, because I just like it, a little bit of vanity. So I pull the fat down a little bit. And then what I do is sometimes cycle it, just a little more information than most of you need. But I cycle it where I go low fat during the week. And then in the weekends, I might let myself kind of recharge, get some more nutrients in there, eat a little more fat, not going to 100 grams, like I go up towards 40, 50 grams, eating a little more fat. On the weekends to get those nutrients in, right? A little more like sardines, liver, and those things. I eat very small amounts during the week. Have a little bit more of them on the weekend, replenish those nutrients. So I almost fat cycle. But the fat I cycle is not pizza and donuts. It's from really nutrient-dense foods. So I get my nutrients back up around the 40, 50 gram of fat a day. And then I dive back into a little bit lower during the week. And that just helps me burn that fat off. But seems to be working. Thank you. When somebody thank you, that means it's time for me to go. So I'm going to go get some Be Well to You as well. I'm sorry, I'm staring. Oh, same. Oh, yeah. Hey, buddy. Good to see you. All right. Long-winded. But hey, it'll be on here, and it'll be on my YouTube eventually once it processes. Have a great night, guys.